Mayonnaise is one of those foods that most of us buy without giving it a second thought. It's relatively inexpensive, it lasts a long time, and it's already sitting in almost every grocery store condiment aisle. This may sound silly, but since I always just bought it and never really gave it much thought, I always assumed it would be complicated to make. But with one egg, a few pantry ingredients, and an immersion blender, I'm hoping to make thick and creamy mayonnaise in less than 2 minutes. Hi everyone, and welcome to From Scratch Fridays, where every week we're making something that most of us usually buy at the grocery store to see if it's actually worth making ourselves. Sometimes it saves money, sometimes it tastes better, sometimes it lets you control the ingredients or use what you already have, but not always. Sometimes it just isn't worth the time or effort. Mayonnaise is an especially interesting test because the store-bought version is already cheap, convenient, and pretty reliable. But when you look at the ingredients, there's so much random junk in there and so many things added to make it shelf stable, which is great because then it lasts a long time, but I'm not sure I really want to be putting all of that in my body. So today we're going to figure out if homemade mayo is better and compare it to the store-bought mayo in terms of taste, cost, and the time and effort. The crazy thing is that making mayo is basically just one step. Put all of these ingredients in a container, use an immersion blender, and it should come together in less than a couple minutes. So in theory, it couldn't be easier, but let's find out. So in terms of ingredients, you really don't need very much for this recipe. You'll need a neutral flavored oil. In this case, I'm using a combination of an extra virgin olive oil and just a regular olive oil. But the key here is you really don't want it to have much flavor. So you wouldn't want to use just a pure extra virgin olive oil. You'd want to use some combination, or you could also use a vegetable oil or canola oil, since those aren't very strongly flavored as well. But you'll just need 1 cup of that oil. You'll need half a tablespoon of Dijon mustard, 1 tablespoon of lemon juice, 1/4 of a teaspoon of salt, and then 1 room temperature egg. All right, now that I have all my ingredients measured out, the next step is just put everything in this jar and blend it. Really, the only important thing to note is that the egg is supposed to go in first, and then you can put in the rest of your ingredients. And the shape of the container actually matters a little bit when making mayonnaise. You just want a tall, narrow jar that is only slightly wider than the head of the immersion blender. And now the moment of truth. I'm gonna put our immersion blender in here. I'm gonna stick it all the way to the bottom to make sure I hit that egg, and then I'm gonna blend it for about 10 to 15 seconds. Now that I can see the mayonnaise forming, I'm gonna start pulling the blender up towards the top, and then back down. All right, and there you have it. You can see it looks just like mayonnaise, has that thickness just like mayo. Kind of crazy how fast that all came together. Okay, so now that I finished with the recipe, we're gonna try tasting both of these to see how they compare. But one thing that I wanna note first with this recipe is, since it does call for a raw egg, it's recommended that you use a pasteurized egg, and then after that, you only keep it for up to 4 days in the refrigerator, per the USDA. If you're immunocompromised or a little bit older or have any sort of concern about consuming a raw egg, it's probably best not to do so. Okay, but let's move on to the taste test. I thought about trying these with French fries or on bread or something like that, but I wanted to taste their pure flavor, and honestly, I kind of love mayo. Like, I was definitely one of those kids when we were younger and went on field trips that I would eat mayo straight from the packet. But okay, starting with the store-bought mayo. I mean, that's good. It's the flavor you grow up with. You can taste a little bit of that tanginess, that acidity that either comes from like a lemon juice or a vinegar. Tastes a little eggy. It's definitely perfectly smooth, very creamy, perfectly good. Okay, let's try the homemade stuff. This is definitely thicker, creamier. I can taste a little bit more of that lemon juice or that acidity coming through. Definitely very comparable. I think the store-bought mayo is definitely saltier, but I mean, if you like it a little bit saltier, you could just add more mayo in the homemade recipe. Definitely very, very close in terms of flavor. Now, how does the homemade mayonnaise compare to the store-bought in terms of cost? Since our recipe makes 1 cup of mayo, we are comparing it to the price of 1 cup of the store-bought mayo. And the crazy thing is, for this test, the cost comes out to basically the same. The homemade mayo was 78 cents per cup, and the store-bought was 80 cents per cup. Over half of the cost came from the cup of oil that the recipe called for, and I used an olive oil blend, but you could definitely use a cheaper oil. In terms of the hands-on time, this recipe took no more than 3 minutes. Probably a minute for taking stuff out of the refrigerator, a minute for putting it all in the mason jar, and about a minute of blending. So it really comes together incredibly quickly. So now the real question is, would I make homemade mayonnaise again? And the answer is, I'm not sure. I honestly don't really eat that much mayonnaise, so it's really nice just to be able to buy a large container, stick it in the refrigerator, know it's gonna be good for a long time. And with this stuff, like, you have to use it within at least 4 days. So that's a pretty quick turnaround time. So I definitely wouldn't use this much mayo in that amount of time. I think I would maybe make the homemade mayo if I was using it to make something else, like a homemade ranch or a homemade tartar sauce or something like that, where really the thick, creamy nature of this would really be a benefit, and I would go through all of this mayo in that short amount of time. But otherwise, I would probably just stick with the store-bought stuff. I hope you enjoyed this episode of From Scratch Friday. Let me know in the comments if there's any recipes you'd like to see me make. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.